The Mayo Experience.
That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience 2020 Fantasy Football Rankings, but with a spin of NFL injury news. And, Dr. Pat isn't going to be talking to you. We're actually going to bring on a real doctor to tell you about the severity of these injuries and which ones concern him the most. However, if you're new to the Mayo Media Network, which is a brand new YouTube channel, remember to become a subscriber right now. You hit that subscribe button right now. Thank you very much. Also, smash the like button for the video, and in the comment section, you tell me the player's injury you are most concerned about heading in to 2020 fantasy football drafts this season, or even just week one on DraftKings. We can do that too. Also, if you are listening to this as the audio podcast and you're on Apple Podcasts, 5-star review, please. Or just 5-star rating. Scroll to the bottom, hit 5, boom, be on your way. It takes like a second if you're actually listening to the audio podcast version of this. Enough of me. Draft kit's in the description if you want to check that out. We've already done some week one stuff and some draft. We're going to continue to update all of the injuries, all of the rankings, all the way up until the season actually starts. And boom, we're into week one. Joining me on the line from the Fantasy Doctors, both .com and YouTube page, ton of videos up on all of the players right now, is Dr. Jesse Morse. What's going on, man?
Hey, how are you?
I'm all right. You kicking back or what?
We're ramping up. We're getting ready to take off, assuming this season takes off.
Yeah. We're almost to the finish line in terms of drafts. I'm holding my draft as long as possible. I believe I'm doing my main draft the Wednesday, the day before the season actually starts. I mean, as long as people can get it into the system, what's the difference? I want to have as much information as possible going into this, but it's injuries that I find it somewhat perplexing right now because you don't have all of the information you would normally get with all the coverage you would normally get, people seeing what's actually going on. It's a lot of hearsay. It's a lot of coach speak, not a lot of concrete information. So who is the one player realistically that you're looking at right now that you're like, probably worse than it looks?
Well, I would have said Darius Geis, but that's no longer a concern. Chris Carson, still don't know what's going on with him. Is he going to play? I don't even know if he's been cleared yet. We're kind of running out of time here. That's definitely a guy that's concerning to me. We just heard about Montgomery going down yesterday. That is definitely a mild concern in general. And then we have some other guys that are probably not going to raise the flag in terms of concern, that are a little bit down the draft board. Your Tyrell Williams, your Mike Williams, but they're still concerning. A lot of the top level guys, we thankfully, as far as we know, are pretty healthy right now.
So let's talk about David Montgomery. He strained his groin in Bears practice. What is the optimal recovery time for something like that? Like 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks? And when do you think that we actually see him on the field?
So there's rumblings that they're trying to get him out in 2 weeks. Probably not the best idea. The issue with groin injuries is they're notorious to re-injure and not heal properly. And then when you get back on the field, you re-injure it, and then you miss another 2, 3, 4 weeks. They're very uncomfortable, and especially for a running back trying to cut every which way, not going to be very comfortable to do. So I would say 4 weeks is probably a good rule of thumb. If he has any setbacks, maybe closer to 6.
Okay, so you mentioned Mike Williams in there too. He's dealing with the AC sprain in his shoulder. The guy is perpetually banged up. What is a realistic timeline for him to actually make an impact this season? Because it seems like he went from being like, kind of mid-round sleepery type. Maybe he's the deep downfield guy that Tyrod is going to go with this season. But now he has a bum shoulder. He's always banged up. Like, do we even see him by midseason?
The good news, as far as we know, is he's not having surgery. If he did have surgery, he probably would not have been out for at least 6, maybe closer to 8 weeks, maybe even a little longer. He's likely dealing with a grade 2 or maybe a grade 3 AC or shoulder sprain right here at the top of the shoulder. These are quite painful, and anytime you reach out in front or overhead, he's going to have pain, which is obviously not good for a wide receiver. So probably 4 weeks, you'll start to see him ramp up, and then closer to 6 weeks, you'll probably start to see him be more effective. So it just depends on how he does and whether or not the shoulder responds to just manual therapy without needing to go in. Some of these guys don't rehab well and they end up having to get surgery.
Darrell Henderson, and I only bring him up because, if he's not going to be the backup, all of a sudden we're looking pretty good with Cam Akers. But he has this hamstring problem. But it came out today, and we're recording this a day before this is actually coming out, that he's expected to play in week 1, expected to be available in week 1 at least. Doesn't that seem like a pretty quick turnaround for a hamstring injury for a running back?
Yeah, so a lot of these guys suffer hamstring injuries early in preseason. We see it every year, and even some of these guys even feel them, almost halfway through the season, you can still get them. And a lot of it's because they're going maybe 85% in training, and now they try to show off. They try to show their teammates and the coaches what they can do, pushing it 100%, and all of a sudden that hamstring's not ready, and they suffer a minor or moderate tear. We see guys like DeAndre Hopkins, who's banged up with one right now. We see Henderson. There's probably about 10 guys. AJ Green just came back with one. These have a tendency to linger anywhere from 2-3 weeks to 6 weeks, depending on how bad it is. And if guys come back too soon, they will re-injure it. We remember with that with Fournette a couple of years ago when he came back, really banged it up, and then he was out for like another month. So I think 2 to 3 weeks is possible. He probably won't be featured much. It really depends on how hard they push it in practice before they say, yeah, you're ready to go.
Well, one that really concerns me that I saw crop up today was Joe Mixon apparently missed yesterday's practice and today's practice because of migraines. And the first thing pops to my mind, I think it pops to everyone's mind when you hear migraines, is Percy Harvin. And it doesn't turn out well if that's going to be the case. And he still has this contract issue that's coming up as well. What's your take on Joe Mixon? Is this just kind of like hardball to get a new contract? Is this a real thing? Like, where's your read?
It's a good question. I mean, it's kind of ironic that we haven't heard about this ever. I mean, he's kind of been around for a decent amount of time. And all of a sudden now we're just hearing about migraines. You can just, I guess, randomly develop migraines. But I think it's an interesting timing thing. But nonetheless, these are people who get migraines are miserable. I mean, you want to just be in a small, dark room with no sound, nothing. You don't even want to think about getting hit, or running through holes and trying to figure out which lane to choose. So hopefully he can get this under wraps. There is some good meds they can use. The timing is a little ironic. Maybe his migraine will go away if he gets a contract extension.
I mean, that's always on the table. Like, what do you make of, like, I just see the 49ers keep signing, then cutting, then signing more wide receivers. So we're dealing with both Deebo, who has the foot problem, and then Brandon Aiyuk pops up with some soft tissue injury too. And then there's reports that Kyle Shanahan's basically saying like, oh, Deebo could play week 1. He's not playing week 1, is he?
So he's the criteria for what he suffered in terms of timing is almost perfect around week 1, but they shut him down this week and said he was not practicing this week, which makes me think there's pretty much no way he's playing week 1. He suffered a Jones fracture. Jones fractures are of the 5th, but in the foot, these notoriously do well, but you need to give it about 10 weeks after you come back from surgery and rehab. Once after 10 weeks, the data is really good for low re-injury risk. So I wouldn't be surprised if they rolled him out slowly, weeks 2, 3, 4. The problem is they're starting to get thin, and signing guys like Kevin White. And unfortunately, Hurd went down with an ACL. Now their stud Brandon Aiyuk went down with a hamstring. So I'm hoping they don't push Deebo too quickly, and just let him heal appropriately when he's ready to come back, because you don't want him re-injuring it mid-season and then losing him the whole season. So I think the first couple of weeks you probably won't see him, or if he does, it won't be much.
So you mentioned Aiyuk. I mean, stud is probably like pushing it here, all right? Just because you go to Notre Dame, all of a sudden you're really good. Hard pass on that. Give me Claypool instead. That's where you want to go. But,
I agree.
But at the same time, hamstring injuries, these soft tissue injuries, was this to be expected from a lot of people without regular training camp, without preseason? Like, And you mentioned DeAndre Hopkins, Darrell Henderson, Aiyuk, and there's been a bunch more. Do you worry about these guys like week 3, these same guys that have, if they don't get the proper time to heal, if they're trying to get back on, and right now they probably do have the time to get themselves healthy. Like Aiyuk had 2 weeks basically to take off before week 1 of the season, but that's also 2 weeks missed of practice for a rookie. And if he tries to push himself to get back at playing at like 80%, like you mentioned, like, isn't this something that could re-aggravate itself in like week 6?
Without question. And that's the problem, is that the guys that rush back too quickly, it's not going to heal. It's going to be 80% healed. And now they try to push it. They try to get past the DB to go for a long ball or whatever, and it re-injures, and now they're out for another couple weeks at a minimum. The other concern is that the guys who think they're good now, because they're really not in true competition, there's no preseason games, they're having limited practices, they're canceling practices. Some of the guys that feel like they're good now, what happens in week 1, 2, or 3 when they're going for a route, and all of a sudden the hamstring starts nagging, and now we miss them for a couple weeks or a month.
So you brought up Chris Carson, he's returning from the knee injury, but hasn't he been missing practice because of there was a death in his family? He's been taking time off to kind of be away from the team, and once you're out from the team to come back in, like he watched Wednesday from the sidelines in practice. But are we concerned that he's actually injured, or because they've been saying he's healthy enough to go, he just hasn't gone yet? Is that sort of coach speak, like, oh no, he's fine, we're going to brush this aside? Or do you actually feel like there's a legit concern here?
So they're pushing Hyde pretty hard, in my opinion. And I don't think Penny's probably going to be able to be ready for early season. I wouldn't be surprised if they held him off until halfway through the season because of his ACL. The issue with Carson is we don't know the specifics of his injury, but when you piece it together, hip fracture and the fact that he didn't have a surgery means that there's only a couple really of options. The thing that makes the most sense to me is a stress fracture of the hip, and this is a blood supply issue. So if he pushes it too hard too often this season, he's going to be at high risk to do it again. I don't know if he's got the appropriate reps. I mean, I think none of us really know that. If they say he's good, I guess we have to trust, but is that coach speak? So we know they love to run the ball, but as much as they probably should pass it. I don't know. I mean, he's a great value pick right now, but at the same time, what do you believe? We haven't really even seen him in practice much. For whatever reason, but still, like, there's definitely concern there.
Yeah, it seems like all the talk right now is that it's going to be fine. He's our guy. Even Carlos Hyde was like, yeah, we all know Chris Carson is the guy here. But at the same time, they could be saying that to throw anyone off, or maybe that's what they're being told and they just don't know. Maybe the injury is worse. So there is a bit of risk. I still think I would go for it right now. That would be, my take on it, where he's going still like late 3rd round, early 4th round. I think that's fine. What about someone like Kenyan Drake, who's in a walking boot, but it's just regular nicks and dings, as Cliff Kingsbury said, like walking boot scares me.
So I tried to discuss this in the video the other day, and I'm like, we don't know why he's in it. So there's so many different options it can be. It's funny.
Are any of them good things?
Not really. I mean, you don't just go in a walking boot just for the heck of it. I mean, those things are uncomfortable. I mean, I don't know if he's weight bearing or if he's non-weight bearing, but meaning if he's walking on the boot or if he's using a little scooter or crutches. But either way, like, there's only a couple options why you'd put someone in a boot, and none of them are, oh, you're going to get back on the field next week. Like if it's a calf strain, you could do that. If it's a fracture, okay, that's a different story. You're still injured. If it's a bad ankle sprain, I mean, it's a high ankle. Like, there's certain things you're going to put it in, but what is it? And you're supposed to now. You're telling me that this guy who's never had a significant amount of touches, 300 plus, you're expecting him to be thrown in this crazy high volume offense, and he's still the RB1 2 weeks from now, but he's in a boot today. I love him as much as the next guy, but that's a little concerning to me. He was in a boot last year. Why? Why does this the thing he likes to do before the season? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's some sort of fashion statement from Kenyan Drake. I have no idea. Of guys that are coming back that missed last year, it looks like Cam has the inside track to be the starter in New England. I think Cam's going to be good, but there is still that unknown injury possibility of how is the foot? How is the arm? Like, he had myriad injuries over the year. How close to 100% like Cam that we remember do you think he might be?
So as far as his foot injury that derailed him last year, don't worry about that. So once these are undergo surgery, these do great, and you really don't worry about them anymore. The risk of re-injury is pretty low. The shoulder, on the other hand, is a different story. He has had multiple rotator cuff repair surgeries in the past, and at the end of the day, that's what you're using to throw. He's never been the super most accurate guy. He's more of a threat with his legs, and he has a strong enough arm and semi-accurate enough to make you pay. I think they're going to utilize him appropriately. You're not giving him the veteran benefit of the doubt, and they're making him work for it, which is smart. But there's definitely an injury risk here, but he's pretty low risk and pretty high reward in terms of cost right now, at least in my opinion.
Well, it's sticking with the Patriots just for a second. Sony Michel finally gets back to camp with this foot injury that has been seemingly plaguing him for ages now, and no one really knew what to do. It caused Damian Harris to vault up some boards. Then he got too much hype, but now he's going to fall back down because it looks like Sony Michel is coming back. Something about this doesn't smell right to me, and I don't quite know what it is because that's been the hardest thing. Like I mentioned, the lack of information, the lack of communication. These teams can be shady. If I was the team, I'd be shady as fuck. I get what they're doing because they can do it right now. But at the same time, if we're trying to parse through this, does anything smell fishy with Sony Michel to you?
He scares me. When you go back into his history, he has a history of ACL tear. He had a lot of volume at Georgia. He looked pretty good in his first season with the Patriots. Last season, he really didn't have any crazy games. He got volume. He didn't really miss any time, but he's had a couple knee surgeries. Now he's got this random foot surgery that just came out of nowhere as far as I'm concerned. So there's definitely concern. I mean, if you think about it, Damian Harris has the draft capital. He has the pedigree, and he's reportedly looking pretty good. So in my opinion, Harris is the one to beat right now. And Sony's there, but I think Harris is the guy.
I mean, we're never going to know. It's probably going to end up being like Rex Burkhead, or they'll re-sign Brandon Bolden, put him in the backfield for 2 of the games. That's the one problem with the Patriots running back fantasy-wise. Like, taking them on DraftKings, absolute shot in the dark every single week. If you have them on your season-long team, just take the one who goes the latest. That's usually the best strategy. Or just take someone like James White, who's not going to be great, but he's probably not going to kill you at the same time. Or just pass completely, unless Harris falls back to like the 13th, 14th round. Ben Roethlisberger. Last time we saw him in game action, he had thrown for 351 yards and then got hurt. The season before, he threw for 5,000 yards. Everything we see about him, like visually, he's like fat, he has a giant beard, he looks wildly out of shape and not like a professional athlete. All the reports that we're getting out of camp is he's throwing lasers. He looks great. Which Ben do you expect to get based off what he went through over the past 12 months?
I expect Ben to look great, actually, to be honest with you. He suffered a pretty rare injury for NFL quarterbacks. We don't know if he had his UCL reconstructed, Tommy John surgery that baseball pitchers usually undergo, but we do know he at least had his flexor tendons repaired, which is basically the throwing tendons for your forearm that insert into your elbow. Either way, he says he's been dealing with this for years, and this is like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So with that being said, he's going to have better velocity. He's going to have probably more accuracy because of the velocity. And I think he's going to leave people pleasantly surprised. Whether or not they have the tools to do what he did 2 years ago is probably a different discussion, but I think he's a great pick. And Big Ben's still Big Ben. Now he just has his elbow / throwing arm back.
This one is kind of vague, putting it out there, because it's a leg injury and he hasn't been practicing. Do you worry about DeAndre Swift? The fact that he's a rookie, he was getting like first team reps over Kerryon Johnson right now, but in Lions practice, it's Johnson and then Ty Johnson. So it's Kerryon, then Ty. And all of a sudden, DeAndre Swift is just kind of watching from the sidelines. It just seems unusual to me, him being a rookie, that you'd want to integrate him as much as possible, but he's just sitting over here with a leg injury, and we don't even know what the leg injury is.
Yeah, they've been really hush-hush about this. I just tweeted this a little bit ago because I saw a report and they said he's still out, and it's kind of went under the radar. He's missed 6, I want to say it's 6 games, 6 practices or days, however you want to calculate it. We don't know what it is. Is it a calf? Is it a hamstring? Those would be my 2 best bets, soft tissues. I'm assuming they would want him to get as many reps as possible with first team or second team or whatever, just to get him, and not only in playing shape, but understand the playbook and everything. And obviously he's not doing that. So this is a little concerning. The talent is there without question. I wish we could get some clarification, but probably won't.
No, we're definitely not going to get any of that. Then you have some other guys down the list. Like, we don't know what's really going on with Allen Robinson's ankle. We don't know if Lamar Jackson actually has a strained groin or he just doesn't want to practice today. There's a bunch of that stuff. The Miles Sanders one is somewhat concerning. Is it a calf injury? He was seen with a sleeve on his leg. It seems like he's going to be ready to go week 1, but are you pensive at all? Like, if you had the 8th pick and you're sitting there, Miles Sanders is available. That's around where he's going, 8 to 12. Are you pulling the trigger? Or are you like, I'll just go with a similar option elsewhere. I'll take Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'll take Derrick Henry. I don't want to have to deal with what could be a problem. Or you're like, not a problem.
Part of me wants to say he's a top 3 back, but this vagueness is a little concerning. I think CEH is a little bit of a riskier pick, but at the same time, maybe it's safer knowing that he's healthy and he's in a definitely elite offense. Henry is a bowling ball and continues to defy odds, and reportedly is catching the ball more. I would have some pause with Miles. If he was going a little later, probably would be a little bit less, but you really can't miss on your first round pick, especially if we know that he's got something. Hypothetically, say it is a calf and he comes back in week 1 and he re-injures his calf and now he misses the first month of the season. If you lose your RB1 at the first month of the season, how are you looking in week 5? Probably not as good as if you had him.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Like, how about someone like Tyrell Williams, who's dealing with this torn labrum? I think it was Chad Johnson back before he was Ocho Cinco. He was Chad Johnson, and I think he played a year through a torn labrum. Now, he was a high level receiver, and it seems like the Raiders are gung-ho to replace Tyrell Williams at this point. But do you think he can last through the season? What sort of effectiveness do you think that he can have in this offense with this sort of injury?
So this injury is it's uncomfortable, and it really depends on the severity of the labral tear. So if you look at the shoulder, it's a ball and socket joint. If you take out the ball and you rotate it, you would basically see the labrum as it circles around the side of the bone. And its job is to keep that ball in the socket. Well, if you were to have a tear in the back and you push that ball back, you're going to pop it out of the socket. So if he's only got, 10% tear, not a big deal. If he's got a 50% labral tear, he's not going to be effective at all. That thing's going to keep popping out. He's going to be loose. And anytime he reaches up, he's just going to feel like he has no control over it. This reminds me of Anthony Miller's recurrent shoulder dislocations that he wore that sling, and then he eventually had repaired twice, I think.
Yeah, and is Anthony Miller someone who just worries you for just reoccurring injuries over time?
This all stemmed from his recurrent shoulder. He's actually been pretty healthy. I remember when I wrote up his profile, he really didn't have much other stuff besides the shoulder. And the shoulder is pretty classic. Once you have a shoulder dislocation, especially before the age of 21, the percentage of re-injury is 85%. It's ridiculous. Once you get it repaired, you really don't have to worry about it much anymore. You can still get it injured again, but if that's all his issue is and it's repaired, which it was, I like him this year. I think he's a sneaky pick later in the draft, especially PPR, because he could be, he could get some volume there.
Yeah, no, listen, if you were riding Anthony Miller towards the end of last year, you're doing pretty well, and that's with horrible quarterback play. Maybe if Nick Foles can come in and improve the quarterback play, all of a sudden you're looking a lot better. So I want to kind of shift off of individual players and just talk a little bit about what your perception is of How is treatment going to be affected by COVID, basically? If you can only have so many people traveling with your team, traveling city to city, does that mean some pieces of the medical staff have to stay behind? You have to share a medical staff when you go to places? Like, how is this going to work?
Oh, this is going to be a nightmare. There's no other way to put it. These guys are going to be so sick of testing, it's not even funny. Right now, they're trying to be really careful in terms of staff. I mean, logically, you should be. You're going to have your trainers, and they're going to have to be checked regularly. The team docs are going to have to be checked regularly. Everybody's going to have to wear masks until the foreseeable future. Everything's just going to be slower. You can't put 5, 6, 7 guys next to each other unless everybody's cleared. I guess you could. I think it's just going to throw a monkey wrench into the smoothness, how everything should be flowing. And it's just, I don't think it's going to flow that well this year. So they're just going to have to deal with it. They're going to have to stagger it. They may have to see players in their rooms. They may have to coordinate time blocks, that type of stuff.
Do you think that's going to pose a problem for players who get injured and their rehabilitation? It may take longer because they won't have potentially access to every facility, access to all the trainers at every time that they normally would. That if you have a hamstring injury and maybe you could have come back in 3 weeks, maybe now it takes 5 weeks. Is stuff like that on the table?
I think when you get to this level, that they're going to make it, they'll do what they have to do to get you back. These guys pretty much have their complete, full personal training staffs, physical training staffs. So at that point, they're really only dedicated to those guys, and they will be fine. They will make sure that they do everything they have to. They're not really having to worry about staggering in regular patients in like we do. So when it comes to that, I'm not overly concerned about them delaying it. If they get a positive test or something, obviously that changes things. But in terms of actual treatment, I think they'll be pretty good.
Okay, so what happens if someone tests positive? Do we know what the fallout from that is actually going to be? Like, are you out 2 weeks? Are you out a week? What happens if an offensive lineman tests positive for COVID? Do you then have to, if you're practicing with the offensive line and going face-to-face with the defensive line in practice, are like both those units out for the game? Like, is there an actual contingency plan, or are we just playing this by ear?
I have not seen anything. And one of my theoretical situations was, what if, say, the Kansas City Chiefs lose their entire offensive line? How is that offense going to fare that week or 2 weeks, depending on how long they're out? That's the question. Is the data so far from NFL, which just reported the other day, has been ridiculous. Like, they did something like 50 or 80,000 tests, and there was only 1.7% positive, and the majority of them weren't even players. They were more staff. So far it's been good, but you got to remember, these guys are all staying in the same cities right now. They're probably staying in hotels, a lot of them. Whereas when they start traveling, you're throwing a monkey wrench into that. So we really don't know their protocols, at least from outside perspective. I'm sure the teams have their own protocols, but they haven't shared with the public yet. It's definitely concerning, especially trying to figure out if it's a star player. What if Brady or Mahomes or Saquon or CMC, so one of those guys happens to catch it, and you hear about it on Saturday? Like, what do you do? There's nothing, you can't replace him at that level. So, I mean, it's just, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
I was thinking even more about what if it happens to guys in Monday night games. And I'm talking about this from gambling, from fantasy purposes.
Yeah.
And I don't even know what the team is going to do. Like, they're not going to, you want to limit the amount of people that you have with you traveling from city to city. So it's not like you're bringing your practice roster with you, or maybe that you get to bring 1 or 2 guys from each position with you. I have no idea how this is going to work. But we saw that baseball ran into real problems once you started traveling city to city, and guys weren't at the hotel or not at the practice facility, and they were sneaking out to go to strip clubs or sneaking out to get food, sneaking out to go see someone, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And I understand why people would do that. It's only human nature to do it. But I think of someone like the Vegas Raiders, We saw year one with the Golden Knights. Whenever anyone went to Vegas to play them, like they were just spent by the time they actually played the game because people would go hard in Vegas. The guys that are actually on the team and lived in Vegas, after you do like your first 4 nights, you're like, okay, I'm kind of over it right now. Like we're not going out on Saturday nights anymore. It's not like we're lining up to go party in Vegas because there are one time of year that we're here. But like that, it feels like Vegas itself is going to be a real problem because it's year one for this team in Vegas. And then you have all the teams rotating in and out. Like that seems like the worst case scenario place to me.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be and even local casinos here in South Florida. There's no social distancing. I was talking to someone the other day. There was a lot of people in a small area and no one was wearing masks. I can attest to that. So imagine how it is in Vegas where you have much more casinos, much more nightlife. The odds of the guys staying out of that and be getting lucky and not catching COVID or whatever. The teams and the coaching staffs are going to have to be really strict with these guys and say you cannot go to the casinos because the risk is so high that you may literally have to forfeit the game because half your team is potentially positive. Whether or not they're false positives or not is a different story, but still.
So I don't want football to be canceled. It's weird that people like argue that like people want to my living is football. I don't want to see football go anywhere. I want everything to go as smoothly as possible. Fortunately, the NFL seems like a league that would just push through it anyway because they're the NFL and that's what they're going to do. They're going to try to make their money. So you have that on your side. Even if, listen, they endanger people every single week anyway. What's just one more thing to add on is probably the perspective that they're coming from with this. So we're probably going to see our games. I'm shocked they didn't bake more like bye week or flexibility into the schedule. It seems like they've set up the schedule to be best case scenario, and that's going to be it. No contingencies really anywhere along the line. But what do you think is the act? Like, what does it take? I don't want to say to shut down football, but to really cause some havoc here. Like out of the gates, week 2, like 3 teams kind of go what? Like in baseball, a team is out for a week. You miss 7 games. That's a lot to make up in a 60-game season. But you can play doubleheaders. You can kind of fudge that and figure that out. What happens in football?
I mean, guys aren't gonna do doubleheaders, especially against 2 different teams.
Yeah,
that's not realistic. So then, do they make it a 12-game season or something like that? I mean, hypothetically, think of it this way: 4 different teams that are not scheduled to play each other all get enough guys where they can't field a proper team. So they have to cancel that game. Well, that means that whoever they're playing is going to cancel, obviously. So now you have hypothetically 8 teams who are not playing that week that are going to not have a game that week. So what do? It's not like baseball where you can just say, oh, next weekend we're going to play 2 games instead of 1. You can't do that in football. And then what happens to the next week? What if they don't clear protocol by then? What if some of the 10 of their guys are still quote unquote positive and infectious? Now what do you do? There's many more questions than we have answers.
That's the whole thing. Like if there was like I know like the PGA was pretty good with this. And it's an individual sport. You can travel in a bubble. These guys all fly private to every course. It's apples and oranges. But at least they put something out being like, hey, here's what happens if this happens. And then they actually amended it after like 3 weeks. They were like, okay, false positives are coming up. This guy did test positive, but he can come back now. And they rolled with it a little bit to see what was safe and what wasn't. And I think they've done a really good job with that. They've probably been the best bubble type sport. But again, it's golf. It's not you're dealing with between players, between people who need to be at the field. You're talking about like 350 people, probably between staff, caddies, whatever, people working at the course, cameramen. And with football, it's just going to be completely different. Are you surprised they didn't do like a 4 to 6 city bubble or even do an 8 city bubble and put all the division teams in like one place or figure out the schedule that way? That seems like it would have been the sensible move, but at the same time, maybe that we're the ones being crazy about this and all of a sudden it's just going to work and it's going to be fine. And they've had it figured out the entire time.
I would love for them just everything to go smoothly. As we saw with baseball, it really hasn't been, and that's probably as close as you're going to get. NBA's in a league of its own, and because they can play all in one place, and they're at the end of their season. NHL is very similar. They're actually playing predominantly in Canada, and they're also doing a bubble because you can get away with that. But as far as I know, there's no place that has 10, maybe 12 quality NFL fields next to each other where they can do it in one spot. Maybe they do a New York, Philly as one area. Maybe they do LA for another area or something like that. But I don't know. I mean, I think the problem is now you're talking about having all of these guys stay in a hotel that's technically public for 6 months? I mean, what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a good solution. So I guess just kind of rolling with it and hoping it all works out would be, it's going to have to be the move because that's what they're doing. Are you surprised that, you're in Miami, the Dolphins are allowing people to games? Fortunately, no one goes to their games, so it's probably not that big of a deal. But are you surprised that they're, even week one, they're allowing people to go into the stadiums?
I'm actually going to try to go to the game just to say I went to the game during this season. But yes, I am very surprised that they're the only team, as far as I know, that has confirmed they will have fans in the first game, home game or whatever it is, which is just fascinating to me. Even if they perfect protocols, it's risky.
It is. I mean, it can't be so risky that you're not going to go.
No, I mean, I'm not worried about myself as much as I am, the players. I can self-quarantine for 2 weeks, no big deal. These guys are around, 50 to 100 people all the time, whether it's themselves or staff, and the infection rate is so high that it's just concerning to me for that regard. I mean, you're talking about fans that are getting hypothetically close to, say, the cameraman or the sideline people, and then they're getting close to the players, interaction. I mean, there's so many possibilities.
Yeah, what I thought was strange about not doing a 4-city bubble. Now, the point of putting these people up in hotels, first you would need to find adequate places for them to stay. It costs a lot of money. You're away from your family. You're just away from your house. People would probably just go insane inside these bubbles the entire time. But you could probably set up, the 4 fields. You could have your 1 o'clock slate. There's 4 games at once. You probably have to play on Saturdays, which I'm sure that the NFL would absolutely adore if that was going to be the case. Have a 4 game, and you could just play back to back. You could make something like that work. But I wasn't even thinking about Super City. It wouldn't be like New York, Washington, LA, and Chicago. Why not go to North Dakota where there is no COVID?
I mean, it just comes down to field, I think.
But in that situation, you would only need 1 field, and you could deck it out. And if you're not going to have fans anyway, then there's really no big deal. You just actually need a football field.
Yeah, I mean, you'd need a field. You'd need appropriate housing for God knows how many people.
That would be, I guess, that would be the big thing: the lodging in places like this.
And then you'd need the staff willingness to go to X city, whatever. A lot of the medical staffs have regular clinics every day, and they happen to be at the games on Sunday and stopping by the training facility a couple times a week. So are they going to fly out to wherever? Are they going to have one training staff for a couple teams? There's so many crazy possibilities.
Yeah, I guess that is my biggest concern with the NFL, and it always has been. Because like I said, I think they're just going to push through it regardless of what happens, because that's what they're going to do. It's just there's so many moving pieces. The size of these teams, the size of the coaching staff, the size of the training teams, and all these things are necessary for it to work. That would be, versus every other sport, they don't have the complications that football probably is going to have. And like I said, maybe because they've had the extra time to work this out, that maybe they actually do have a plan, and they just don't feel. It's like the injuries; they just don't feel like telling us.
Exactly.
All right, Dr. Jesse Morse, tell everyone where they can find you, your videos, and your cheat sheets.
The easiest way would just be thefantasydoctors.com. You can follow us on Instagram or Twitter, the Fantasy DRS on Twitter. My personal handle is Dr. Jesse Morse. That would probably be the easiest way, and you can kind of sift it from there. I have an injury cheat sheet that I've been uploading daily, doing a lot of video content as the injuries trickle out, trying to keeping people updated. Those are free on my, you can get them right through the Fantasy Doctors website. Just trying to stay up to date as much as we can with little information we get.
Probably time you get back to your patients, don't you think?
Yeah, I think they're waiting for me.
All right, I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me on Twitter at @ThePME. Subscribe to Mayo Media Network, the new YouTube channel where the Pat Mayo experience will exist from henceforward, whatever that is. We don't have great grammar or words here. We don't have the best words on Mayo Media Network, but we have some. Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. Please subscribe, download, listen, review 5 stars, or just rate 5 stars. That goes a long way. The entire draft kit is in the description of this video and podcast. And please smash the like button. Thank you all for watching. Win totals next week. That's going to be fun. We'll see you next time.
That Mayo experience! Experience!